Let's add some pop to our player cutouts. I'm gonna bring in a new cutout. Let's go with Jake Radak. And I'm just gonna size him a little bit, turn off Evan Switek. And the first thing you wanna do is just get him in the right position. Let's go up to filter and go to camera raw filter. Now, camera raw filter is basically like Adobe Lightroom, but it's within Photoshop. So think of it as just basic photo editing. I mean, it can be as basic or as advanced as you want it to be, but I'll always start with maybe adding a little bit of exposure to brighten up the image, add some contrast. I typically bring the highlights down, especially if they're wearing white. That just helps the detail show a little bit. But maybe you want a more shiny graphic, so you might bring highlights up. And you can adjust these sliders to the extreme just to see what they're affecting. So this is shadows. I also typically bring the shadows up a little bit, maybe increase the whites and decrease the blacks just to add some more contrast. And then texture and clarity. If you're not going to change anything else, typically sports designers will add a good amount of texture and clarity. So let's bring texture up. You can see the detail it's adding and sort of sharpening the image. Clarity, same thing, a little bit more extreme. So we don't want to go crazy, but just adding a little bit of texture and clarity does go a long way with making a design pop a little bit more. And then dehaze, you can see if this is something you're interested in. I typically don't really touch it. That's kind of your basic camera raw setup that I do with most of my player cutouts before getting any further. So we can see the effects. If I turn off and on this smart filter, this is after, before, after. It's already looking pretty good. Another thing you can do is add a little bit of drop shadow just to separate them a little bit from the background. So if you go down here to function and drop shadow, that will add a drop shadow. I typically have it around 30% opacity. You can adjust the size of it. Also the opacity. And there we go, you can see the effects. So you can bring it way up, way down. I feel like 30% is a good spot, and then, a little bit sized up, but not significantly. And I typically don't separate the distance or mess with the spread or anything. Hit OK, now we can see it before and after the drop shadow. Not super noticeable, but it does help a little bit. You can see like the colors get a little bit darkened, which again just separates him out a little bit more. The next thing you want to do with any cutout is you want to match the colors on his jersey or on the image as much as possible to the background. So see this blue in his jersey really doesn't match the sole's blue. There's a few different things we can do to adjust that specific color. So first we're going to go to an adjustment layer called selective color. So if you go down here to this icon at the bottom of the layers panel and go up to selective color, and now we're going to clip this specifically to Jake Radak. So I'm going to hold Option and hover in the area between these two layers and then click. And that makes it so this selective color layer is only affecting the Jake Radak layer immediately below it. If you forget that shortcut, you can also right click and scroll down to create clipping mask. That will clip it as well. So let's go in to the blues. This is gonna let us fine tune specific colors. So obviously this is a blue we're dealing with. We wanna try to get it a little bit more purpley, it looks like. So let's see what happens when we drag these sliders in various ways. So this magenta is definitely helping us get closer. We're just kind of eyeballing it. We're adjusting and seeing how close that is. You can drag him over a little bit just to see how close we're getting. So let's see, a little bit more. I like that there. So that's pretty close. The next thing you can do is do another adjustment layer. This time we're going to go to hue and saturation. And if you clip this one as well, again, I'm holding Option and clicking. So now they're both clipped just to the Radak cutout. You can go up to the blues and adjust the hue of them. So if we think the hue is a little bit off, you can see that might be a little closer. And let's decrease the saturation. And that's pretty close. So these sliders here, you're just going to want to play with them until you can get a pretty close color to the other colors in the image. And it's just gonna help any design look a little bit more cohesive. And we can also see there's a little bit of orange on the Austin Soul jersey right there. It's matching pretty well, that background, so I'm not gonna mess with the orange. I think it was mainly that blue that we wanted to adjust. Now the last thing we could do is, you see in the design we have this light coming from the top right corner. In an ideal world, we want some of that light to hit this subject in this design. I mean, you may or may not, it's your artwork and it's yours to do as you please with. But let's say we wanted to add some light to the player cutout. Again, go down to the adjustment layer icon and let's add curves. Curves and levels are very similar. They're just ways you can affect the darks, the midtones, and the highlights of any layer or any image. So again, I'm gonna clip this to Radak just because he is the only thing we want this affecting. And I'm gonna bring these curves up to make them brighter. So I'm gonna click in the middle of this here, and you can see when I drag it up or down, it is affecting the brightness of Radak, and specifically the brightness of the midtones. So we're bringing up the light kind of all around. We want to kind of take it to an extreme, but not so much. And now I'm going to invert this mask by hitting Command-I, and that's hiding this layer currently. Now we're going to paint back on the mask in white with a white brush. So I'm going to hit B on my keyboard, and I'm going to get a soft brush, and I'm just going to paint on like the back of his head. And it'll just brighten that part up a little bit more. And maybe like his shoulder. So this is just like some real quick, basic lighting you can do. And again, it doesn't make a huge difference, but with all these little effects together, you will get more pop out of your cutouts, and it will lead to a better looking design.